This is Jean Bokassa, and one of the most insane things he did was eat people. He started off as an officer for the Central African Army. The country's first president was David Dacko, and Jean became a trusted leader for him, until he decided to overthrow him and become the leader of Central Africa himself. Jean put together an uprising with some of the troops he was leading since he was an officer in the military, and some more people thought the former leader Dacko was, dumb, I guess. The country was dirt poor, and most people thought that Dacko was to blame. Jean's uprising stormed the central palace and put Dacko under house arrest. Immediately, Jean took control of Central Africa, declaring himself the new leader. He became the president from 1966 to 1976, and after that, he declared himself emperor of the Central African Empire in 1976, all the way until his downfall in 1979. He made himself emperor because that meant he was basically seen as a king, and he had power over everything. Whatever he said goes. But his people would soon find out how crazy he actually was. For starters, his coronation, which is when a king or queen is crowned, was about $100 million. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, celebrating a once-in-a-lifetime achievement, but the country he was ruling was dirt poor, like I said. Like, there were people starving to death, and he was wearing a gold crown and robe while driving through the streets in a Rolls Royce, showing everyone how much money he had while his country was starving. And he was doing a lot more than spending money. He was well known for torture, executions, and forced labor to his people. His security was feared across the country, and many were killed for even minor offenses. And people who disagreed with him were often imprisoned or executed, or even worse, fed to his lions or crocodiles. Yeah, you heard that right. He fed people he didn't like to lions and crocodiles in his private zoo. I think I'd rather try my best against the guillotine than a lion or crocodile. He also would order thieves to be beaten, usually with hammers and chains, while he watched. Plus, he couldn't pay his civil servants because, he was too busy spending all the country's money on a Rolls Royce and a zoo, and his soldiers would also walk around wildlife reserves with AK-47s, slaughtering elephants for their ivory. As you can see, this guy meant no funny business. I mean, what kind of animal is killing an elephant? Look how cute they are! His empire only lasted 3 years, but at the end, in 1979, after young school students protested against mandatory school uniforms, which were expensive, and most people couldn't afford, Jean ordered the military to open fire on the protesters, killing over 100 children. This was basically the end of his rule. That same year, in 1979, the former president Dacko actually overthrew Jean the same way he had done to him 13 years later. So I guess the saying is true. Karma is a bitch. How he expected to kill 100 innocent students and not have people be mad about it is beyond me. Oh, and I almost forgot, like I said earlier, Jean was also allegedly a cannibal, keeping human remains in his kitchen, even serving humans to unsuspecting guests. These rumors grew even more after his downfall, when it was alleged that some of his enemies' bodies were, dismembered, I guess? I don't understand why he would even try to eat humans. There's so many better options, like, had this guy never heard of filet mignon? Now, you're probably thinking it can't get much worse than that, but unfortunately, you would be wrong. Saparmurat Niyorazov declared himself the Turkmenbashi, or the leader of all Turkmen, from 1991 until his death in 2006. He wanted everyone to see him as a godlike figure, and to make that happen, he put himself everywhere. Statues of him were put up across the country, and portraits of him were displayed in every home and business. And if you didn't have your picture of him up, well, it was seen as disrespectful and suspicious. Sometimes someone who didn't have his image up could even lose their job. And if you thought you could get away with not having his picture up, well, he had 24/7 surveillance on everyone. Even local officials or neighbors could report you if you didn't have his image displayed. His image even appeared on the national currency. In the capital city of Ashgabat, a giant golden statue of Niyazov stood on a rotating platform. Niyazov also decided it was a good idea to rename the months of the year and the days of the week. For example, April became Gurban Sultan, named after his mother, and January was called Turkmenbashi, named after himself. He even renamed one of the days of the week after his dog, and his own birthday was declared a national holiday. But where I think Niyazov crosses the line is when he banned these hairstyles. He banned men from having long hair because he thought it was associated with Western culture. He banned afros or any wild and messy hairstyles because he wanted everything to be neat. And he also put an end to beards for all men under the age of 60 because of his religious beliefs. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. I guess I'm never welcomed over there with my afro and long beard. And I didn't even mention he also banned teeth whitening. I guess I'll take my long, luscious beard, my thick afro, and pearly whites elsewhere. Saparmurat Niyazov was obsessed with controlling everyone when it came to their personal grooming. But he was also in charge of his people's diet, banning the consumption of certain foods, including salt, fast food, imported foods, and alcohol. Plus, he didn't allow French fries. I'm just glad I wasn't born there. Now, I know I've already told you a bunch of things that guy is banned, but just bear with me here. This guy was so insane, there are still a few more. He made gold teeth illegal, banned plastic surgery, and public celebrations of holidays, such as New Year's and International Women's Day. So to my women viewers, just know that this guy doesn't like you. He gave everyone free watches with his face on it, built infrastructure with his face on it, and changed over 300 words, including positive and negative, to Aladdin, just to confuse people. Imagine when you go to the doctors and they say you're Aladdin for AIDS. That could either be very good news or the worst news of your life. At least when he was done ruling in 2006, Turkish Yemen had a good ruler, right? No. Gurbanguly Berdik Muhammadov served as the president of Turkmenistan from 2007 to 2022. He did put all the words back together to what they were supposed to be, so I guess he wasn't all bad, except he banned AC units, banned satellite dishes, dogs, and cars that weren't white. So, do what you will with that information, and you decide if he was good or not. But someone who definitely wasn't good was Ibrahim the First, also known as Ibrahim the Mad. He was in charge of the Ottoman Empire from 1640 to 1648, and his downfall was that he was absolutely insane, and one of the most insane decisions he made was him ordering the execution of his own family members. He had several of his brothers executed to make sure there would be no threat to his power. And if you were in his family and not executed, well, then you were most likely spending your life in jail. Oh, and he was also famous for killing his own son. So there's that. The story goes that Ibrahim was deeply paranoid and became convinced that his son was plotting against him, so he made the rational decision and ordered his child's execution. So, I would personally get as far away as humanly possible from this guy. Maybe go to Antarctica or something. Ibrahim I was also known for his obsession with overfeeding his mistresses and getting them fat. He's said to have ordered them to be fed to the point of extreme obesity, as he believed this would enhance their beauty and make them more desirable. He spent an insane amount of money on food, and some of his women were reportedly forced to eat an insane amount in order to meet his expectations. Even though this had serious health consequences for them, it didn't matter. He liked his women to be what the kids nowadays would call thick. And as if stuffing his women like a Thanksgiving turkey wasn't bad enough, one of his more bizarre actions during his reign was his decision to imprison his own mother, Kosem Sultan, who had been a powerful figure in the court. Despite her significant influence in the empire, Ibrahim had her basically on house arrest, and she couldn't leave his palace. Ibrahim also had his sisters locked away in the palace, out of fear they might plot against him. He was also obsessed with horses to the point of madness. It's said that he would spend his days riding and caring for horses more than he would take care of his own people. He even ordered his horses to be fed with expensive food and luxurious accommodations, while most people of the empire couldn't even afford to eat regular horse food. He had a stable full of prized horses and even ordered that people were to be punished if they didn't respect the horses' well-being. Ibrahim's reign came to an end in 1648 when he was overthrown by his own court due to his insanity and inability to rule. His reign had brought the empire to the brink of collapse. Ibrahim was finally imprisoned in the Topkapi Palace, where he lived the remainder of his life in isolation. This is Adolf Hitler, and he was absolutely insane. He's best known for being a part of the death of somewhere between 17 to 20 million people. Yeah, so it's safe to say he wasn't the nicest guy in the world. Hitler started as a soldier in Germany during World War I as an infantryman and was actually wounded twice. So close. Once he was in power, Hitler put together a plan to have complete control over Germany. One of the first things he did was put together the Gestapo, or the secret police. They were in charge of taking care of anyone that didn't agree with Hitler or the government, spying on citizens and instilling fear into everyone. Oh, and if someone didn't follow the rules or spoke out, they would be arrested immediately on the spot and most likely tortured or embarrassed in public. The Gestapo were also in charge of rounding up Jews and other victims, forcing them to concentration camps and extermination camps. When people were transported to extermination camps like Auschwitz, there were these so-called selections. As soon as these people arrived at the camps, individuals were sorted. Some were sent to gas chambers to be killed immediately, while others were forced into labor or kept in the camp for further use. Some things that may have got you sent to die were your political beliefs, your race, ethnicity, age, and health. But as a way to cause fear, sometimes the choice of who would live or die was completely random. Concentration camps were mostly used to imprison large numbers of people, including Jews, political prisoners, and other groups that the Nazis wanted to control or eliminate. In these camps, people were forced into hard labor, and many died from starvation, disease, or brutal treatment. The main goal wasn't immediate death, like the extermination camps were. These camps were specifically designed for the mass murder of these poor people. The main purpose of these camps was to kill as many people as quickly and efficiently as possible, mostly the Jews. People sent to extermination camps were typically killed upon arrival, often in gas chambers and mass shootings or even starvation. They lived in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions and were extremely abused. Hitler's main goal was to create a pure Aryan race, especially people with fair skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. A huge part of Hitler's obsession with the pure Aryan race was his deep hatred of the Jews. He saw them as a threat to the purity of the Aryan race, and believed they were responsible for many of the world's problems. He believed in survival of the fittest. Only the strongest and fittest races should survive, while weaker ones should be completely eliminated. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Hitler. You're lucky I wasn't alive back in the 1930s, or I would have packed my bags and went to Germany so I could eliminate you myself. In 1941, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, prompting the U.S. to declare war on Japan. 4 days later, Hitler declared war on the United States, officially starting World War II. The U.S. was seen as the most powerful country in the world, so probably not the best decision ever by Hitler to bring them into the war. His army was way too busy fighting almost the entire world, it seemed like, and this was basically the reason he ended up failing. Way too many people to fight, not enough people and resources to fight them with. As the war started turning against Germany, Hitler kept making dumb decision after dumb decision. One big one was he refused to retreat. This led to an insane amount of German deaths. In the final days of the war, as Germany was losing, Hitler kept on fighting to the death. And on April 30th, 1945, as troops were closing in on him, Hitler ended his life. And when it was all said and done, he was responsible for the deaths of between 17 million to 20 million. And he was the reason World War II even started to begin with, which killed around 70 million people, around 3% of the entire world population at the time. So, yeah, he definitely wasn't a very nice guy. And someone else that wasn't a very nice guy was Mao Zedong. In 1949, after years of civil war, Mao and his people emerged as the winners. The People's Republic of China was established, and Mao became the country's undisputed leader. However, as China began to rebuild itself, Mao's visions of the country would soon show to have a ton of problems. In the late 1950s, Mao Zedong launched the Great Leap Forward. He believed that China could rapidly industrialize and pass up Western nations like the United States by making farmers work together on large farms, sharing the land, tools, and the crops they grow. Instead of each farmer having their own land, they shared massive government land and worked together. Instead of letting businesses or people make their own choices, the government decided what got produced, how much, and where it goes. Peasants were forced to live together and work together. Private farming was completely removed to try and quickly boost farm production. This idea was one of the worst failures in human history. Farmers were made to work on land that wasn't good for growing lots of crops, and leaders also lied about how much food was being grown to meet Mao's insane production goals. This made it so China completely ran out of food, causing the deaths of 15 to 45 million people. I mean, even entire villages were completely wiped out, all just because this man thought it would be a good idea to combine all farmers on terrible land and beat up, torture, or kill whoever didn't think it was a good idea. And what makes it even worse is that he continued with these policies. It didn't matter that millions of his people died. No, he just didn't want to admit he was wrong. It takes a certain type of insane to kill millions of people and not think you did anything wrong. And what makes it double worse is that wasn't even the only insane thing he did. He tried to silence smart people like teachers, scientists, and anyone that didn't like what he was doing, and raised the kids in China to be excited to follow him. This led to millions of people who disagreed to be hurt, tortured, or killed. Many people were embarrassed in public, beaten up, and sent to work in camps. Old buildings, temples, and anything that was a part of China's past was also destroyed. Schools were closed, the economy stopped working, and many people died. You would think after all this, someone would finally be able to take away Mao's ability to be a dictator over China. Well, if you thought that, you would be wrong. Mao Zedong stopped ruling China in 1976 only because he passed away. Yeah, that's the reason. After killing millions of people because of his insane ideas, he was still in charge for about 20 more years. At the end, he totaled up about 45 to 70 million deaths, which could be anywhere between 8.3% or 13.8% of the entire Chinese population. This dude was this close to wiping out his entire population, and I bet he still thought he was the best leader ever. But that's not the only dictator that is responsible for millions of deaths. This is Joseph Stalin. He was the leader of the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953. And one word to describe him would be insane. The first thing he did was called the Great Purge, so you can already guess it wasn't great. During this time, Stalin targeted anyone he believed might be a threat to his power. This included high-ranking government officials, military leaders, scientists, and even just ordinary citizens. Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, arrested, tortured, and executed millions of people during the purge. It is estimated that around 700,000 to 1.2 million people were executed, while many others were sent to labor camps in the worst conditions you could imagine, where many died from abuse, starvation, and being overworked. These executions were often carried out in public show trials, where these people were humiliated before being killed. Stalin's goal was to remove anyone who might replace him as the dictator of the Soviet Union, but it was his own dumb decision that led to his own demise. The Great Purge weakened the Soviet government and military, as many experienced officers and leaders were killed. This was part of the reason Hitler was able to be so insane. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union during World War II, the Soviet Union was not ready for any sort of invasion. Because of Stalin, they had lost experienced military officers during the purge and made their military way weaker. So, good job there, Mr. Stalin. You played yourself. Just like Mr. Zedong over here, Stalin took control of the Soviet Union's farms, forcing millions of peasants to work on controlled, collective farms. To meet his unrealistic grain production goals, Stalin took food from the Ukraine and other regions, which meant no food for them. Around 3 to 7 million people died due to starvation. And of course, Mr. Stalin didn't care. Millions of people were sent to labor camps, often working under terrible conditions with little food or rest. Many died due to overwork, hunger, and harsh punishment. Stalin valued progress at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing human lives. And after all this, he was seen as an almost godlike figure, with his image appearing everywhere in Soviet life. So that just tells you the type of person he was. We already know he thought he was better than everyone else, but he also thought he was indestructible. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, Stalin ignored multiple warnings about the invasion. His stubbornness and refusal to believe that Nazi Germany would actually invade led civilians and soldiers in the dark, and millions lost their lives from this one man. Oh, and like I already said, a total of 27 million people died from the Soviet Union alone in World War II. But Joseph Stalin himself was responsible for about 20 to 30 million deaths. But another dictator that killed people for ridiculous reasons was Saddam Hussein. He ruled Iraq from 1979 until 2003. He was the same as any other dictator, using torture, executions, and disappearances to eliminate anyone seen as a threat to his ability to rule. One of the main things known about him was his paranoia and obsessive control over Iraq and its people. He surrounded himself with loyal people only, and a bunch of yes men. Whatever he said, he wanted everyone to agree with. The perfect recipe of anyone with a little bit of power. He was also known for being extremely cruel, torturing people, executions if you disagreed with him, and making people disappear. One of the most insane examples of this cruelty was the Anfal campaign in the 1980s. He targeted the Kurdish population in northern Iraq. In 1989, he ordered a chemical weapons attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja, killing at least 5,000 people and injuring thousands more. This attack was part of Saddam forcing these people to leave, torturing them, and the execution of thousands of Kurds, proving he will do anything to maintain control over Iraq. Chemical weapons were officially banned through the Geneva Protocol in 1925, which banned the use of chemical weapons in war, although the development, production, and stockpiling were not banned until the Chemical Weapons Convention came into force in 1997. It didn't matter these weapons were banned because Saddam was insane, so why would he listen to any rules? In 1980, he invaded Iran, sparking the Iran-Iraq War, a war that lasted for 8 years and led to the deaths of around 1 million people. Even after the war, Saddam continued, showing his insanity and disregard for human life. By the time 2003 rolled around, the US had enough, and the military launched an extensive search to locate him. Intelligence agencies received reports and tips about his possible whereabouts. Saddam was believed to be hiding in Iraq, but he had gone into hiding after his collapse. After his capture, Saddam Hussein was kept in US custody for several months before being handed over to the Iraqi authorities. He was put on trial for crimes against humanity and war crimes. In November 2006, he was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging for his role in the Dujail massacre in 1982, where he ordered the execution of 148 people. But if you ask me, I think the punishment should have been leaving all these guys alone in a room with me. I definitely would have shown them who the real dictator is.